Recently I was doing research about what to create content around, and I came across a very interesting question, which was, why are Webflow websites slow? And so today I want to take some time to explain why that question is actually not a relevant question, and two, how you can take steps to make sure that your Webflow website is not slow. Okay. First of all, Webflow is simply a visual HTML and CSS editor. And so what Webflow does is that it takes all the fundamentals of web development and puts it in a visual interface. This means that anything you can do by writing native normal HTML or CSS like you would in a normal coding environment, you can also do in Webflow. And so this gives you one, flexibility, and two, the power of HTML and CSS. But three, it also creates the risks of having a slow website. Now, why is that? So if a Webflow website ends up being slow, that is entirely up to the developer who created the website. Because again, Webflow only gives you the capabilities within HTML and CSS. So if you know your way around HTML and CSS, you will create a website that is fast, high performant, and follows UX best practices. Now, if you're unsure or new to Webflow as a platform, then, well, you're gonna have issues and may end up with a slow website. So the answer to the question, why are Webflow websites slow, is actually, it's an invalid question because it depends entirely on who developed the website, if they did it properly. And when I rebuild websites for my clients, a lot of the time I see the same sort of pattern repeating. In fact, there are always 4 key areas that are missing some polish when I rebuild these websites. And number 1 is compressing and converting your images and graphics assets. This is such a simple one that it sort of confuses me a bit. When I say compress and convert, what I mean is that if you have an asset, let's say an image, that is 2 megabytes in size, it's 5,000 pixels times 3,000. That is a massive asset. Most likely you do not need an image that is that size, like those dimensions, and two, a 2 megabyte image is massive in terms of website sizes. And on top of that, the file is probably not in an optimized format. It's probably JPEG or PNG or maybe even a GIF. So what you want to do is, number 1, check where are you going to use that asset on the website. If it's a little thumbnail somewhere in a small corner somewhere, then you probably don't need a 5,000 pixel wide asset. Maybe 500 is enough. So resize it. When you have resized it, you want to convert it as well. So if we have a PNG, we want to convert it to .webp. And what this does is that 1, search engines and other web browsers prefer this format. It's a format that is made specifically for website usage. And then 2, this format actually compresses images, but in a close to lossless format. So if you have a lot of high detail, you won't lose any visual quality by converting it to WebP. Then number 2, you want to reduce the amount of third-party scripts on your website. So these are things like trackers like Google Analytics, or forms like HubSpot, or video embeds, things that are coming from external sources, so third parties. Because what happens when you add a tracking script to your website, for example, then that script is trying to load a whole bunch of assets from an external source. And so this creates a scenario where, hey, the user is trying to load your website, but there's an external resource that could be slower than just loading your own platform. That could be slower than just loading your own little page. And on top of that, you have zero control over what that script actually loads. So it could be loading a whole bunch of less than useful assets that you don't need. So what you want to do is reduce those scripts to a minimum. And I know that it's often required to have a few scripts. Like you most definitely need or want at least some tracking. So like tracking on the amount of visitors and users on your website. And you often need some kind of video. If it's a landing page, for example, videos are very common. But it's a trade-off you need to be aware of, and maybe don't fill an entire website with a whole bunch of embedded videos that is going to slow things down drastically. All right, number 3, remove remove unused CSS classes. Now this is very simple. In Webflow, you have a button that says clean up unused CSS. So you click that button and it will remove any unused CSS classes. The reason why this is important though is because, let's say you have a page, you want to load it. Every single asset on that page, every section, every text, every image, everything you see has a certain style attached to it. So it's appearing in a certain way. It's distinctly different from other websites. And the way this happens is by having a CSS class, but every time you load that web page, you also load a full list of all CSS classes available. This is the default behavior of Webflow and you don't have any control over that. So if you have 1,000 different CSS classes, then 1,000 different classes are going to be loaded on a page that may only be using 50. So you're gonna have a whole bunch of unused assets loaded on a page that doesn't need it. So if you clean up unused assets, then maybe you get down to 200, let's say, 300, 400. Now that's still a lot of classes, but at least you're not loading 1,000, which will of course slow things down. Then, number 4, be mindful of how many graphics assets and animations you use on a web page. Now the first part of graphics elements is pretty self-explanatory. If you have 100 different images on a page, but it's going to take longer to load, that page is going to be larger than a page with 5 images. It's pretty self-explanatory, and so reducing the amount will of course reduce the amount of time needed to load as well. But something that's less talked about is the amount of animations, especially in the Webflow community, and this is a bit of a controversial topic. Animations are important. They can be used to increase engagement, they can be used to give a certain brand feeling and brand look and enhance your brand, make you look more qualitative. But oftentimes what happens when we have the visual power of something like Webflow is that we go overboard with it. It's the typical question of just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And those are very different. So something I employ in all of my client projects is that I ask myself the question of, is this animation or interaction necessary? Will it improve either the UI, UX, or the engagement rate or the conversion rate of this specific page? If the answer is yes, then keep it. If it will not, and maybe it's just like an additional thing that, hey, looks cool but not necessary, then maybe it's time to leave that out. Maybe it's time to delete that one. Because what happens is if you create an animation or an interaction, then Webflow saves that as part of the overall website file. So the files that are loaded when a user enters your website, which by extension, of course, also increases the total size of that website file, which then will also increase the time needed to load your website. So making sure that you don't go overboard with graphics elements or animations and interactions is very important. So following these 4 key points that I've seen in my experience, I know you will end up with a much faster website that is faster to load, have higher conversion rate, and just better overall UX. Because like I said in the very beginning, a Webflow website is only as fast as qualitative the developer is. Right? Because like I said in the beginning, how fast a Webflow website is entirely dependent on the quality of the developer. So, are Webflow websites slow? The answer is no. Alright, see you in the next one. Bye.